Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by Oscar nominee Meg LeFauve and screenwriter Dave Holstein, the writers of Pixar's blockbuster sequel, Inside Out 2. Thank you both for doing this. Congratulations on this film. I really enjoyed it. Meg, obviously, the original film, you're nominated for an Oscar for writing, wins an Oscar. Such a success on all these fronts. When you're coming back to work on the sequel, I guess first, what were your first initial thoughts on how to expand this great world that you kind of created in the first film?
I came back and immediately thought I'm crazy. What am I doing? Why am I doing this? This is so hard. But the director, Kelsey Mann, had a very clear vision of anxiety taking over headquarters. So we had a wonderful place to start. I was anxious. He's anxious. We have anxious kids. We have a lot of self-research. Um, but he was also very clear, and we were clear together on what a sequel needs to be able to do in terms of go new places and expand the world, but also earn its emotional story and what's happening to Riley, and especially for Joy, our main character, what really is Joy's journey. And so you kind of start there. And we had to win new emotions. That wasn't something that was just a given. It's an idea we came up with, and we had to go to Pete Docter, who was our EP, but also obviously the original creator and director of Inside Out. So it wasn't an immediate sell, I'll tell you. We had to do our work. We had to do our due diligence and prove where they've been and how does it work in the world and where are mom and dads and why don't we see them there, and many, many, many sequences that were in the movie for a very long time explaining all of this, but ultimately you didn't need it. Um, and they kind of earned their keep on their own. So it was harder than the original, which I didn't even think was possible. To be honest with you, when I did the first one, I thought nothing could be harder than this. But now you have rules set down, and you have to increase new worlds and rules. And there's three levels of story going, so that each have to affect each other. So very, very challenging, but well worth it to be able to tell Joy and Riley's story.
And Dave, for you, how about you? Obviously, to come in here working with Meg and stuff. What, having watched the first Inside Out, and I guess, what did you like? What was your thoughts on what you could bring to it, and kind of what, maybe a fresh perspective that you're gonna bring to this as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously it was a daunting process. The first movie is this perfect, if you take the world of this girl's mind, the parable of joy and sadness is a really hard story to beat, And so for me, it was about how do you take what the first movie did so well and yet somehow escalate it and mature it so that, there it kind of earns a right to keep the movie earns a right to keep growing with Riley. And for me, that was just about finding, what happens to joy as we get older? What is centrally sort of sad and beautiful about that, and how do you explore it inside the mind visually in a way that adds to the first film and sort of feels special and earned.
I want to ask you? You mentioned Riley there. One of the things I thought was so great about the sequel too is that it feels like Riley feels like a much bigger. Obviously, he's I feel like a bigger character in this film. Obviously, older, so has more agency and maybe able to do different things. And I guess yeah, how can you talk Meg and Dave? I guess can you all talk about how you kind of really expanded Riley to take ownership of the story more so than just being the vessel that the story is being told. And I feel like in this film, especially, it just feels like she's such a much bigger part of the film.
Well, of course, we immediately knew that at this age, your parents' influence gets smaller and your friend influence gets very large. That first little fun bit of how big the parents' personality is versus the friends was an immediate idea. That we knew that this is the age when your life is with your friends, so that Riley and what she was going to go through was going to be with her friends, and it was going to be much bigger. And I also think the arrival of the sense of self really starts to expand Riley herself and all the changes she's going through.
Dave, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's so hard in these films, which are essentially road trip movies, how do you not repeat the same journey, and I think for me, introducing the visual metaphor of the belief system was a really beautiful idea that came together. I really enjoyed taking those memory marbles, you know, that were so iconic from the first film, but then building on top of it these new sort of belief strings that I think the art department did such a great job with. And then all builds into, you know, a sense of self, which is again like such a heady concept, but like how can you land the plane of making that something that people don't think about that way?
Mhm.
And something that they care about, you know, because in the end, you're, you know, Riley is this bigger character, I agree, but like um Joy is the main character, you
Yeah.
know, and so you have to figure out it's easy to find ways to give Riley's story because she has a lot of options, right? But Joy has the same world to build that story in. And so it's how do you expand it? How do you find new visual ways to build on it, new intellectual ideas? And it's such a movie, I think, because that's such a heady concept, right? Like I have a 7-year-old. He's not getting all of that from the movie, right? He's seeing a really exciting Looney Tunes, you know, at that age, and he loves it. And I think it sort of behooves us to keep adding these mature ideas in because, unlike a lot of films, you know, these are movies that get watched every 3 years of someone's life sometimes, you know, and so when you're writing these, the cool part is you're writing it, yes, for the initial audience, but I'm writing a movie that someone can see multiple times over the course of their life and see a different film. You know, you're going to see a different movie as a parent, as an adult, as a teenager. And it just speaks to a lot of what we're talking about, which is how do you build out this world and how do you respect it again and again?
And still tell an emotional story. I mean, I think
Yeah.
the hat trick of this movie is it's incredibly complex, but we have to present it very simply and kind of like, well, of course, that takes many, many drafts and many versions to figure out how do you present all the layers of Riley, right? Including that incredibly beautiful belief system, which, Dave and I feel like is some of the most profound ideas in the movie. Is the belief system, and that your sense of self is built from what you believe about yourself. So you take all of those powerful emotional ideas and now put it into 3 different storylines that have to be fun and go new places and entertaining and emotional and about relationship, and all of them affecting each other too, by the way, which I just think is crazy that every sequence we had to actually, if Joy had a moment down in the mind, it had to affect Riley and anxiety. And so they were all playing the 3-dimensional chess. So
Right.
I,
I think
it's crazy, crazy.
the you know my favorite scene is the anxiety attack at the end. And like that scene doesn't work unless all 3 of those storylines that Meg is talking about really structure themselves to converge at the right time, at the right moment, with the right, impact. And um, yeah, it took a lot of iterations to get there. I mean,
It has to line up with the plot landing, but also those arcs that
mhm.
anxiety's arc is going to hit here, Riley's arc is going to hit here, Joy's arc is going to hit here, and they all have to be big, juicy, emotional, experienced arcs too. Because sometimes when we were doing this, you'd get a really great anxiety line and joy line, and it's working together, and then you're like, oh my gosh, what's Riley's is flat as a pancake, it doesn't work, and you literally are going to have to blow up it all because if you change Riley's, it's going to change this. So it was this constant iteration to try to find just what looks very simple, but takes a long time to try to get to that click.
The good news, Christopher, is it only took me about 800 pages to get to that section. I don't know how many pages Meg ended up writing.
Thousands. We all write
Thousands. I mean,
thousands. It's
it's
thousands.
it's a funny project because I've written movies before, and maybe you'll do a couple drafts, and you're getting over 100. I mean, this was a lot of work that just speaks to the process at Pixar and what makes it so special, but also, in a movie about perfectionism, you're sitting there playing that game within your head, writing a movie about the emotions that someone else has had going through. It's very meta, uh, and I don't recommend it lightly to anybody.
It is an incredible challenge.
It's amazing hearing you talk about. I was hearing you talk about it. I think the way everything clicks together. I just hearing you talk about it, it's like, oh, remind me. I guess it sounds like a little like Inception. Like I don't know whether your mileage may vary, but I'm like the way the end of the movie kind of just has to all cascade into line. And this is similar to that. And I never really thought about that, even though obviously it's a mind kind of movie too. But that's just really funny.
Kind of, as writers, we're holding together the story structure, the character arcs, all of the set pieces, and that it has to be saying something emotionally. What is the revelation for Joy? What is the revelation for anxiety? What is the revelation for Riley? That's the rudder for all these other choices. Now add in, you have character designers, and the character designs are coming in. That could actually shift a little bit of the character because you didn't know he was so big and she was so small. And you're like, that's an amazing idea. Now let's go back. Now let's do a whole envy run. Let's do all of the other characters also have to be part of this, or why are they in the movie, right? And affecting Riley and affecting each other. That little side with sadness and embarrassment is like another fourth story happening. And it becomes like a symphony that on the page we have to be able to see as it goes into boards that this symphony is working together and to create a larger sound.
And the pressure you're feeling, by the way, writing that is, oh, I have to deliver the secret to life, because you're up against the history of Pixar's magic moments that, Ratatouille, going back through the mind of the food critic. You're always looking at what are those special moments that define the movie and really put it on the shelf, for years. And that's a lot of anxiety and a lot of pressure to try to do that because you're just up against the classics. And I'm hopeful that we at least gave people something very emotional and juicy at the end of this film. But it is a high bar.
And what's interesting about it, one last thought on that is, so you have that pressure coming in of what's come before you, both from the first movie, but also all of the Pixar movies, and that bar being very high. What I find very fascinating is the way you get to it is to go very detailed again into yourself, into the director, into what it feels like to be a human being and your own life experiences, right? No matter what notes you're getting, right? You always have to go back to this kind of vulnerable, to me, that's the true bravery. There's a tremendous amount of craft skill involved in creating this movie, but the real bravery is putting ourselves into the movie and how our own vulnerabilities and what it feels like to have anxiety, what it feels like to have a kid who has anxiety, or losing your kid as Joy is, or feeling like you have no role in your child's life, or what is my role, or all of those emotional things now have to start guiding the choices of all those balls in the air.
The other thing I love about the film, and at least this watching it, I was like, oh, when I rewatch Inside Out, which I've seen many times, and I have a young daughter, 6 years old, so Dave, not dissimilar to you, and like we watch Inside Out, and it's great, and it's obviously like I get sad or I'll cry about like the nostalgia of it, right? Obviously, with Bing Bong, you just feel like, oh, you're like the joy and sadness, and like it feels very nostalgia coded, right? Obviously, in general, and then in this one, I felt like even though you have nostalgia as like a great joke a couple of times, I was like, it feels much more. I don't know, in conversation with the president, I felt like, or like we're saying, like all these like real issues like anxiety. And I just was like the nuance of the different kind of emotions that I was feeling watching. And I found like really, because like a sequel, like you've seen sequels where they just kind of repeat the same things, but not only are you doing something different, but I felt like the way the kind of emotions this movie is going for are different than maybe the emotions of the original. And I guess I mean, probably yes, because you guys are really good at this, but like, was that like, did you try to like actively do that? Like think of like, this is the kind of emotions we want to make people feel rather than just repeating like the stuff that made people cry in the first movie, basically.
You're never working backwards from theme or moral or, you know what I mean? But you're always working forwards from what Joy wants. And I think that's, at least for me, Meg, like this is a very complicated process, but what distills it for me is what's the North Star? The North Star is how do you, what happens to Joy as she gets older? What pain is she feeling? How does she resolve it? And yes, when you address that question, you get more mature emotions because the movie is more mature, the themes are more mature, the what she wants is more mature, the pain she's feeling is one of growing. I think that it naturally cascades down into the rest of the work when you start there. But it's certainly the challenge of it.
And even when we started, the one thing we knew is that, in the first movie, Joy is being asked to step back, allow the other emotions, allow her to have a full breadth of emotions because she needs those to connect with people and herself, most importantly. She's kind of got the same problem at the beginning. We always love Joy. She's sending things to the back of the mind, right? She's still kind of like, but not these, right? Because she's always going to be Joy, right? But in the next movie, in this movie, we made a conscious choice that in this movie, she's going to be asked to step forward. That she is, for me, Joy's transition is from a kind of childlike joy, which we do lose pieces of, unless you're Pete Docter or some of the people at Pixar who I believe, I don't know how they have maintained it. But then as adults, you lose that child joy. But what you gain, I think, and what I love about the film is I think that joy is about self-compassion.
Hmm.
She is joy and about the love of skating again and to bring that in, but it's a more mature joy, and that she's being asked to step forward to be the self-compassion that Riley needs. And that self-compassion is what is the ultimate opposite of anxiety, right? Anxiety is so worried about what you're not good at and that you're not good enough and it's all going to go bad because of who you are. But joy is that self-compassion really is the beautiful counter to that, which is, yeah, you're not perfect. It's okay. And it's okay. So for me, every time I get all choked up is when they all hug the sense of self, even though it's all fucked up and there's good things and bad things like all of us. That idea of perfectionism was something that Kelsey was really, really wanting to talk about without us talking about it. In the early versions, we said the word perfection a lot, I'll be honest with you. But as you work on it, you allow it that it gets such a bigger, deeper idea of perfection versus acceptance of yourself and the beauty of the parts of yourself that you're trying to push away. And then if you allow that in and have compassion and joy for yourself in whatever form you take, I just think it's, to me, to watch that ripple into the world, to watch people understanding their own anxiety ripple into the world has been so powerful. I have a friend who said her daughter leaned over in the middle of the movie when anxiety was really cooking. And she said, I feel like that all the time. And her mom didn't know she had anxiety. So for me, that's the other beautiful thing, that when you really are very honest about your own human experience, even in something as complicated as this, it speaks to people. And it's really amazing to me, and I know to Dave too, how it's rippling out into the world. It's an honor to have that happen, and the impact the movie's having.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. I mean, it obviously was such a huge hit, and the response has been so wonderful. You meant like just Dave, you said that too. Like, I mean, I think that's really interesting too. Like talking about this, like my daughter is 6, like watching it. And like you're showing these feelings and something like a child can understand, maybe if not totally, but then like obviously like as a grown up, I'm watching it like able to cry or like fully understand it, and that the child who watched it now is going to watch it again and again. I that seems like it's like such a crazy, I don't know, it's like seems like such a crazy responsibility to have to write a movie like this that is so successful and creatively successful. I mean, like, and I guess like yeah, like how do you make sure how do you make sure you're doing it right, like we're like, oh, like this is a child could watch this and feel something, 10-year-old could watch this and feel something else.
Very easy. It's very
it,
easy,
it,
honestly, because you're always writing to the child in yourself.
okay,
There's no one there making a kids movie. Everyone
right,
there is writing things that they would enjoy, and we're all talking about who we were as kids, how we would receive this as kids. We're all writing to our inner child, and I think that that allows you the freedom to not have to target an audience or to think, well, what's the funniest joke for a child, right? You're just writing a thing that makes you feel something, and you hope that that trickles down, and I think the proof's in the pudding. I mean, I think it does, but we don't start trying to hit what's going to be emotional for a 20-year-old, a 16-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 7-year-old. We just sort of say, honestly, Joy's the main character. What would bring her the most pain? Hope people will empathize with that, and then hope that what she experiences resonates with her, like with them. The first movie for me was Joy discovering the power of sadness, right? And to me, the second movie was Joy discovering the power of joy. And if you can find that simplicity in a journey for just her character, I think that's enough to handshake with a lot of audiences. And I
hmm,
think that's what we were able to do.
yeah.
Yeah, a lot of times in the room, it was just about making each other giggle. Like we have that kid in us too, and so that was really fun to do as well. Just to, you know, how can we making each other laugh with the crazy ideas that you come up with.
And I guess before we have to wrap up here, I feel like I could talk about this with you both for a very long time because I think it's fascinating. The movie's so great, but I guess it seemed like it was such a piece of cake to do the second film. Like, are you already thinking of the third
No
film? I
way.
guess.
No way.
What's the opposite of a piece of cake? Like, what is the
I don't know
opposite of
where you got your information from,
because
but
No, teasing.
that cake is a 15-layer cake, and half of it is gluten free, and half of it like requires no nut. It's a very
meant?
tough recipe to
It's
bake.
meant. Dave,
Um,
tell him what writing one of these movies is like to you. I love your metaphor.
it's like writing inside of a dishwasher while it's on. You're just constantly. You're like,
Barrage.
it's like writing a screenplay is cool, but can you do one, during the spin cycle? Like it's a very, involved process where you are editing, shooting, and writing at the same time all the time. You're iterating, you're writing multiple versions of scenes, you're constantly running physically around the campus at Pixar from department to department, from edit to story, where they're drawing things to better it and to tighten it and to make sure
To keep the
everyone's
whole
still in the
thing
same.
with
Yeah,
3 layers. Like your art, as a writer, your job is everyone's going in multiple directions, but this is the story. But this is the story.
yeah. Your,
That's
your
the
your job is to make sure that there's so many ideas flying around. They're all great because there's brilliant people at Pixar, right? But to make sure that all these great ideas are following the same path. And it's your job just to make sure the story is staying in a center lane. The director has plenty of jobs, and many of them are story related. And Kelsey deserves so much credit for this film. But our job is just to make sure that we're keeping all those ideas connected.
and creating the ways to connect them and the paths and the story, which is you
Yeah.
just walk around Pixar. Let's the story. So and in terms of three, I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know. Good luck. That's what I
Good luck.
say.
That's good luck to the next.
Good luck with that.
The discipline, obviously, in terms of the story, though, I think comes through in the film. Like the Pixar, obviously, the movies have been so strong. This film, I think, is like up there again with like all of these other great films, and you guys did an amazing job. Thank you
Thank you.
again, Meg LeFauve and Dave Holstein, screenwriters of Inside Out 2. It's just a great movie. Thank you so much for
Thank you
both
so
for doing
much.
this.
Thanks,
Thank you
Chris.
so much.